Many women don't discover they have ADHD until their 40s, 50s, and sometimes even later. Not because the signs weren't there, but because they were often capable, responsible, often high achieving. They learned how to compensate, how to push through, how to hold everything together. And then one day, something happens. A therapist notices, a child gets diagnosed, or life just becomes too overwhelming to keep managing the way they always have. Recently, I asked my community to share their experiences of being diagnosed with ADHD later in life. Three wrote back. Their stories are different, but together they reveal something important about how ADHD in women often gets missed. So today, I want to share a piece of their stories with you and a little of my own. This is going to be a fun and possibly very resonant episode, so be sure to listen. Welcome to the Self Loved ADHD Woman's Way podcast. I'm your host, Jen Barnes. If you're an ADHD woman entrepreneur, ADHD adjacent, or ADHD-ish, you've come to the right place. We'll dive deep into the unique challenges you face, from the inner turmoil to the outer obstacles. We'll blend neuroscience, IFS, and somatic healing, and explore practical strategies to help you navigate the world of entrepreneurship with ADHD with greater ease and effectiveness. I'm glad you're here. Sometimes women don't go looking for an ADHD diagnosis. Sometimes someone else sees it before they do. April from North Carolina shared that she had absolutely no idea. She had started therapy a few years back because she knew she needed some help. And then about 2 or 3 months in, her therapist said to her, "I know you're not going to believe this, but I think you have ADHD." April was 56 years old at the time and thought her therapist had lost her mind. But after some assessments, April says that it slowly dawned on her that her therapist was right. Despite her initial doubt, April says she was so relieved. She shared that the relief came from knowing that it wasn't her fault, that she was klutzy, distracted, and absent-minded, and that once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. She said that looking back, she could see that she had always been a little messy, disorganized in her daily life, and that she always felt less than and less polished than others who always seemed graceful and in control. When asked what has been the hardest part about being late diagnosed, April shared that she spent so much time beating herself up over things that she knows now that she couldn't control at the time. So April's message to her younger self, and perhaps all of you listening who are undiagnosed, is that you are not broken. It's not your fault that you're this way. You are worthy, and she says God loves you just the way you are. For her, being diagnosed with ADHD made her believe in herself again. Something she said was worth at least $1 million, which I love because I think it's true. Like April, many women internalize struggles for years, seeing messiness, distraction, forgetfulness as character flaws, and that often then leads to low self-worth. And for many women, like April, diagnosis can suddenly reframe decades of self-blame and even shame. Thank you to April for sharing her story. That moment of recognition is often such a huge shift. Suddenly the past looks different, and the perception of life now opens up in a new way. But not everyone discovers ADHD this way. For many women, the realization comes through someone they love. One of the most common ways women discover they have ADHD is through their children. Kim from Australia shared that she first started wondering if she had ADHD when her son went through early intervention and was eventually diagnosed as ADHD, meaning autism and ADHD, at age 8. All of the questions about symptoms she and his teachers were asked sounded very familiar relative to her own experiences. She was seeing herself in them. Looking back, she sees some of the signs she had all along. Things like talking too much in class, veering from topic to topic conversationally, and seeing that she was exhausting everyone in conversation, never completing anything, being totally messy and behind in her bills, exhibiting sporadic work performance, and even being unable to work full time. Kim says the hardest part of late diagnosis at age 58 for her was sadness around all of the ground she lost professionally and financially, as well as at how it negatively affected her intimate relationships, including a divorce and rejection. She said that getting diagnosed led to changes like no longer beating herself up, going low contact with uninformed, judgmental people, and that she was more open to being medicated. To her younger self, and perhaps all of you listening who are undiagnosed, Kim would like to say, "You are neurodivergent. It is a blessing and a curse. Find out what you need to do to get help so you can fly creatively and protect that space. Don't pretzel yourself to fit society and others' demands." Thank you to Kim for sharing her story. Many women I talk to describe a moment like this. They're filling out paperwork for their child, and suddenly they recognize themselves. Late diagnosis, like with Kim, can bring both relief and grief. Relief that there's finally an explanation, and grief about how different life might have been with support earlier. But sometimes the signs were there from the very beginning. They just weren't understood. For some women, the signs of ADHD were present all along, but no one connected the dots. SS from Canada reflected on the first time she noticed ADHD, sharing that she experienced high anxiety that she had attributed to her narcissistic mother, but perhaps is seeing another factor in her ADHD. She shared that the most obvious sign for her was messiness, something she says was the worst and still is the worst. She also noticed how she could never hurry and that it took her so long to do anything, that she always had to organize her space before she could do any home projects or work projects, and had to eat a snack while she did schoolwork, which seemingly unbeknownst to her was an unintentional but effective dopamine hack her younger self figured out to raise her interest in the task at hand. She also shared about falling asleep in class and not being able to read books unless they were interesting to her. So common with ADHD. She shared that the hardest part of late diagnosis for her was trying to manage her diagnosis, both with what to do with it and how to move forward while her kids were young. She said that she realizes now, and did then, that they needed more stability, emotional regulation, and guidance from her, but that she didn't even have that for herself yet because she was rediscovering things for herself with this new ADHD lens at the same time her kids were growing up. She always said she'd never let her own kids suffer and would get them support right away, but noted that this proved harder to do than expected, especially because she hadn't yet built any of those skills herself. SS says she wishes she could reparent that part of their lives, both hers and her children, knowing what she knows now, and expressed big mama guilt for it. SS's message to her younger self and perhaps other ADHDers is that you aren't lazy, crazy, or stupid. Try not to be shy or afraid, and speak to your teachers. Try to get help earlier. Trust yourself, not the words of other people putting you down. SS said for her that diagnosis reassured her that she wasn't just crazy, lazy, or stupid. Subsequently, she named that it gave her some of her self-esteem back. But she shared that it also led to anger at not having known earlier and not having gotten support, with the recognition that she may not have had to have struggled as much as she did had she been diagnosed earlier and received that much needed support. She says her diagnosis has allowed her to reconsider how she approaches things and that her needs haven't been wrong or dumb. They were just different. As we can see with SS and Kim, late diagnosis often brings mixed emotions. Relief validation, and sometimes anger or sadness about how long you might have struggled without answers. And I want to thank SS for sharing her story. As we can see with SS and Kim, late diagnosis often brings mixed emotions: relief, validation, and sometimes anger or sadness about how long someone struggled without answers. And there's another way ADHD often gets missed in women. Sometimes it hides behind competence. Some women don't get diagnosed earlier, not because they weren't struggling, but because they were functioning well enough that no one noticed or looked closer. And that was my story. So, growing up, I and no one in my life had any idea I had ADHD. And to be fair, when me and the other three ladies who shared their story were growing up, ADHD was not really all that popular and certainly not looked at in girls. But also, a lot of us learned how to function in neurotypical society by doing things like people pleasing and being perfectionists and over functioning. And all of that often resulted in high achievement. We often figured out how to be still in our desks. I can remember in elementary school watching the two boys, Gordy and Peter, well, and probably Stacy, although he probably had complex trauma, but remember them getting in trouble for being squirrely or not paying attention. And so I didn't want to get in trouble. I was a good girl. And so I don't know how I figured it out, but I found out a way to pay attention. Although I did still get in trouble for talking too much. That was the tell about my ADHD. And when I say get in trouble, it was more scolded. Because in all actuality, all of that over functioning and people pleasing and perfectionism made me really good at doing what people expected of me and wanted and needed. Not to, talk about the personal cost to me of growing up not knowing myself and eventually having an anxiety disorder and depression because I didn't know myself, wasn't living authentically, but that didn't come till my 20s. But back then, I had hacked my way through how to do well. And I didn't get in trouble. And then, when I was talking, quote unquote, too much or what neurotypical people call interrupting, yeah, I got scolded, but I was mostly given grace because I was such a good student and a good girl. In all actuality, all that masking hid my ADHD. And it's crazy to think about what my life might have been like had I not done that. I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have made it through college and graduate school, or maybe I would have, but would have had more support. It's hard to know. But this happens for a lot of us. And for me, it wasn't till coworkers had noticed I had ADHD that I got assessed when I was 31. But back then, I was told that I functioned too well to have it, that I was just subclinical. But this didn't include the fact that I was spending about 2 or 3 hours a day being able to function at that level. And so I kept pushing, and then I'd burn out, and something we're going to talk about in an upcoming YouTube video, but at the end of the month, at the end of March, and just kind of going through this cycle of pushing and burning out, and things just seemed so much harder for me than everyone else. Until I started to have more and more clients asking me if I thought they had ADHD, and I don't know, they look normal to me, right? Like using air quotes, of course. But the reason they looked what I thought was quote unquote normal is because I also had ADHD. And so I had missed them, and I have apologized, believe me. But that was my first sign that, oh my gosh, I've been missing this in myself. And I didn't get diagnosed till last year because I was like, all right, I know I have it. But I was actually diagnosed with severe ADHD at age 51. Severe. And what comes up for me is I just feel the exhaustion of all the extra work I did to navigate society. I think of my actuarial exams a lot and wonder, had I known I had ADHD and had support, maybe I would have passed that life contingencies exam eventually with greater ease. And maybe I would still be an actuary, which I don't know, things kind of turn out the way they're supposed to. I'm happy I became a social worker and yoga teacher and healer type because in a lot of ways it feels like my calling, but it's interesting and a little sad sometimes to think about what life would have been like. This pattern is not just mine, it happens more often than people realize. A lot of the women I've worked with in my program Ascend have seen themselves in my story because many women with ADHD survive by pushing themselves harder than everyone else around them. From the outside, they look capable, but inside, they're exhausted. So when you look at these stories together, something becomes clear. There isn't just one path to discovering ADHD later in life. It might be that someone else notices it. A child's diagnosis reveals it. Lifelong struggles finally make sense. And that ADHD achievement hides it until you meet your match, like I did with actuarial exams. And the truth is, ADHD in women often gets missed because we flew under the radar. And for many, our coping strategies are so strong or strong enough, right? As you've heard and perhaps have experiences yourself, many women spend decades believing something is wrong with them, when really, their brains simply work differently. So if you've been listening to these stories and recognizing yourself in them, you're not alone. So many ADHD women spend years believing they're messy, scattered, or somehow different. Sometimes understanding what's really going on changes the way we see our past. And it can also open the door to supporting ourselves differently going forward. If you liked this episode and want more ADHD support and strategies, maybe saw yourself in this, hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And I'd love it if you'd share this episode with other ADHD or ADHD-ish women. Let's help each other see it so we can stop struggling, stop unknowingly suffering, and really start living. Thanks for being here. Take good care.